Hello, good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to the second instalment in PCL's 360 webinar series. My name is Grace Walsh. I'm one of the senior consultants here at PCL. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. On your control panel, please do reach out to us or give us a call on our number here at PCL if you do have any difficulties. There's plenty of people here to help. 01892559540. As I said, this is the second instalment of our 360 webinar program and series, and some more to come. And this is focusing specifically in on the application of 360 assessment to support the appraisal process. So 3 areas I'll be focusing on: a project delivery in the form of a case study that I've run, looking at performance appraisals and best practice, how to get the best and most out of the yearly process and review. Looking then as well at some interesting research results, looking at ratee gender differences that I also wanted to share with you. These are more recent research points, but I think very interesting and very relevant to 360 assessment and review generally. So before I continue on and go through a case study, what is performance appraisal? Performance review, appraisal, it is a formal process for employees and those concerned in their development to discuss individual performance over the last 12 months and really just to focus in on the development opportunities to take forward into the coming year. So what's the objective for this? It really is to identify employee training and development needs in order for them to be effective in what they do, and also then help to identify the support they will need in order to achieve this. It can also affect promotions based on competency and performance ratings. It could be a real vehicle, I think, to improve communication between employees and managers around performance, and as well can determine whether selection, training and development programs are actually being effective. If, for example, you do not see improvements in individual performance across different competencies and behaviours, well then there may be an issue with how development is supported for that individual. What I wanted to be clear about is what's the difference between performance management and performance appraisal. Sometimes I think there's some confusion with this. So performance management is ongoing. It's something day to day. Managers should be feeding back and providing some sort of platform for feedback to employees. And that can be formal, but also more of an informal approach. Whereas the performance appraisal is more periodic. It's usually an annual process, and it is a more formal review, having a more formal process or program survey they need to complete in doing the appraisal with their manager. Ultimately, in a performance appraisal, it is to be an objective form of feedback where individuals are assessed against well-defined benchmarks and competencies. So methods for appraising performance. I think appraisal approaches, documents used in appraisals are quite varied across companies and organisations. Often can be quite ad hoc or more of a mixed approach. Open questions around performance, where individuals and managers can write free text in response to questions like, what do you think the individual did particularly well over the last 12 months. So a more narrative method and approach for feedback and appraising the individual's performance. Coupled with a range of maybe rating scales, so 3 or 6 point Likert scale, looking at whether it is that they align up to a particular competency or not. So again, really quite varied, and I've just listed a couple there, but again, this is quite a short, concise webinar, and we don't have an opportunity to go into all of these approaches, but we'll just give you an idea. There have been, I suppose, more traditional approaches, some of which have been highlighted here. So a forced distribution or a graphic rating scale. I suppose the most traditional is that narrative method. But there's very much new approaches, and I think better platforms that are now being used today, and are definitely the adds kind of a more standardized approach to assessing behaviour. Again, some of them I've listed here. Our focus really today is on the 360 assessment method and approach in support of performance appraisal. The challenge with a lot of these approaches is that, and very often appraisals, there is a kind of a top-down feedback. So managers are looking at employee behaviour and competency in the role and assessing them against that. So it's very much coming from one direction, and as I said, a kind of a top-down approach, or a 180 approach. There might be kind of some peer feedback with regards to an individual's performance. Very often these approaches as well are quite biased. I think as managers, there is always that cognitive bias potential, the halo horn effect. Also, competencies in which individuals are being assessed against are not clearly defined. Very often, you might be looking at the competency around, teamwork or being a good team player. And there might be some basic description given, but nothing really detailed around, well, what does that exactly mean? There's no specific behaviours identified. There's kind of a lax clarity, yet still people are being asked to rate individuals with regards to that competency. Yeah, very often, whether it is that's a poor, average, or good match to that. Also applying and introducing a performance appraisal method, although most organisations will have some sort of approach, applying a more detailed performance appraisal is quite expensive, and it's quite time consuming as well. So, for example, you have internal HR managers are looking to first of all identify a range of questions, items. These items can be different depending on the job role within that organisation, depending on the job and the level within the organisation as well. Then gathering that information, what's the platform that they enables them to do that, then collecting that information and developing some sort of report output in light of that. So it can be quite a lengthy process. Also as well, one of the key issues I think for a lot of the performance appraisals that I've come across in organisations is that it's been a process they have designed themselves. So they have these rating scales which can be effective. However, these rating scales are not standardised. So they engage in this process. An individual gets a scoring. But what does that mean? What does a 6 rating mean, for example? Specifically, if it is that you're looking across the organisation whereby the scoring, everybody gets a scoring of 6, does that mean then it is still and that individual is still being effective in what they're doing. So there's a lot of challenges with implementing a performance appraisal process and the right process for an organisation, for a business. So one of the methods I touched on that can support this is a 360 assessment. And just to clarify what this is, so an individual's self-ratings are compared to the behavioural ratings of people they interact with at work. And this can be, so it's not just looking, okay, well, what's the manager's ratings regarding this individual? It's also looking at peer ratings. It's also looking at direct reports or people that report into them. So it's a top-up approach as well, but also looking at how their clients view them. And it really gives a very holistic 360 perspective of that individual and how effective they are and how they're performing in the job, in the role. And it provides a very robust assessment of individual performance that then can support employee reviews, appraisals, and development. So that's what a 360 is in a nutshell, and there's obviously different types of 360 that you can use. Organisations developing their own 360 in-house product and approach, or there's a range of off-the-shelf products that can help support that. So it's not just me talking about a 360-degree feedback approach in supporting appraisal. And this is, again, just a survey completed last year, which highlights some of the main reasons for organisations using a 360 approach in the business. Personal development being the key one and the main one, part of a talent programme, usually often identifying high potentials that otherwise go under the radar. But you can see there 26% are using it to support the appraisal process. So I think there is this real realization in understanding performance. It's essential and it's pertinent to get the perspectives of all of those people that are working with that individual and to really get a objective, true understanding of performance. So that was just a brief introduction. What I wanted to now talk through is a case study. So this is from last year, an organisation who were looking to use a 360 approach to support their annual appraisal process. So this organisation had an existing process in place. The process and what they had used for many, many years was more around targets. It was about hitting revenue with some behavioural ratings, but nothing really detailed, and not focusing on specific behaviours. And they really kind of wanted to address this. And they wanted to address this because they felt, alongside developing organisational values and new organisational values, because they wanted to bring the organisation in a different direction, by assessing specific behaviours and looking at it from that 360 perspective. Another key point, I think, for this client is they are an organisation where they're very client-facing, working in-house, supporting organisations. So very much on the front line with clients as well as internally, which, however, means that they are not always seen by their manager and not day-to-day seen by even their peer group. So it was important for them to get that 360 perspective, but they wanted to address as well behaviours that were really going to drive the organisation's business objectives as a whole. And as I said, wanted to use a competency framework that aligned up to the organisation's competencies and values framework as part of what they were trying to do as part of a longer term culture change program. on. So just to take you through the various steps, I used a particular approach with this client, but taking you through the various steps from the initial kind of planning stage, why it is that we had decided upon this approach, what we were looking to achieve, and the benefits of using this approach. So meeting with the client, they were wanted a kind of an off-the-shelf 360 assessment. So in discussing it, we identified Profile Match 360, and the reason why, for a couple of reasons, language within one of these kind of off-the-shelf products really aligned up to their organisational competency framework. And they also wanted an approach that could support in the delivery and project manage everything from kind of one central system. So setting up the survey, sending out emails with the information, generating the reports, so that they could streamline the process and make it simple and straightforward. It was a relatively we would say medium-sized organisation with a small HR function, so having something that could really support them in the process was really key, because previously they had spent a huge amount of time in support of the yearly performance reviews. So they wanted a system that could support them in that. So that was one of the reasons why we chose Profile Match 360. So this was the approach, and what we looked to do was identify, okay, well, what are the range of roles within this particular organisation? What are the different levels? What are the different overlapping behaviours that kind of translate throughout the organisation? So there was 3 levels. So from the more entry level, assistant client manager, and then the more senior partner level within this organisation. So the point here was to review the job description. So I was involved in that and getting them to complete as well a job analysis survey, which really allowed us to focus in and identify the key competencies that they felt and I felt were essential for being effective in that particular job and role and that level. And you can see some of them here. So the overlapping ones was around customer service, as I said, very much client facing. So that was imperative that they were had skills dealing and managing customer relationships, and also around being motivated and driven. So again, some of which, as I said, were overlapping, but also as well there were key competencies that really differentiated across them as well. So at that more entry level, it was around being attentive to detail. That was a defining competency. So concerned with being attentive to detail in the planning and execution of tasks. Very often partners and the assistant managers would give tasks to the assistant manager, client managers, for them to implement their ideas and projects, and do the follow through, planning and organising as well on follow up with clients. So attention to detail was really crucial for them at that level. Then moving forward, problem solving were one of the key defining competencies at this level. So concerned with delivering effective solutions and having a good practical understanding of issues. And then the more senior level was a competency which we've named creative, but this is essentially around being able to be creative about new business. So being able to think outside the box, thinking of new opportunities with existing clients, opportunities with new clients, how it is that we're going to get this business in. So concerned about being curious and having lots of ideas, being a resourceful problem solver as well. Be kind of divergent thinkers. So you can see the similarities, but really differentiating competencies across the 3 levels as well. So having identified the competencies, the platform I used has a range of behaviours that relate to that particular competencies, and raters, so including the ratee, so the self, and the raters are asked to say whether they strongly disagree to strongly agree regarding these statements. The decision making, for example, has the vision to make strategic decisions, ensures that all decisions are well informed. People management doesn't do things simply to remain popular. So these are just some of the examples I've pulled through. So ratees and raters respond to these same behaviour ratings. So that can be peers and direct reports, managers, as well as self. And so then you can start to see very clearly if there's similarities or disparities in how ratees view themselves and how other people rate that behaviour. So you can see if there's agreement or disagreement in how the individual sees themselves or how other people see them. So then taking it forward, in completing the 360 assessment, the ratees and raters scores get mapped onto a STEM scoring range reflecting the above. So really, with this type of off-the-shelf products, ratings are compared against a norm sample for each level. So that can really, and the advantage of that is that it can standardise the process, it's consistent, and as I said, the scoring is normative and therefore predictive. So you can see the competency rating for people who, if they're scoring in that mid-average, so 7 to 4, is suggesting this individual partially meets the competency. However, there still might need to be some focus from a development perspective on some areas relating to that competency. And as I said, that is pretty much through all of the competencies, the same process is applied. And to the kind of one of the more final stages was for me to identify, okay, well, looking at these competencies to further support internally and the internal application of this approach. And around the specific behaviours relating to the competencies, I developed a document, some of the points I've pulled through here, which outline in detail the positive and the negative indicators relating to these competencies. And these were quite detailed. I've just pulled through some points here. And this really allowed for clarity around the exact behaviours and what meeting expectations means for that particular aptitude competency. As I said, so kind of scoring 4 to 7 kind of means it partially meets that competency and mostly a line up. However, there might be still some points for development. And then we can get a scoring. So looking at those competencies, an individual self-rating, which is in the red, is mapped on, and then you can see the individual rater group. So you can again see real disparity or similarity. So for example, with this individual, it was quite clear they had skills around being analytical, and also around decision making and analytical, and there was agreement with that, and also around strategic awareness. So we're just looking actually at, rather than the bar graph behind, we're just looking at these behavioural ratings in this graphic for this particular session. So generally, there's some consistency there in how the individual perceives themselves and how other people, maybe more disparity in the area of project management, for example. So you can really start to have a really in-depth conversation with somebody around performance, and it is those conversations around, okay, well, how you view your performance and how other people view that behaviour is really around kind of interaction style, and really start to pull through key development points that they need to address. Benefits of a 360 approach is that it really is an eye-opener, and it can increase self-awareness and recognition of development needs. Because of the 360 angle, it's a very objective form of feedback, therefore can minimise that halo horn effect, cognitive bias that we all suffer from, and as a manager in viewing your employees' performance. And also facilitates real open communication ethos, looking at performance from a really developmental perspective. It's a positive experience, it's a positive process, and it's good to talk about performance. It's good to look for feedback from other people. And this can really increase employee motivation and confidence. The organisation is taking time to improve and support me as an employee. Okay, so best practice, performance appraisals. Okay, appraising past performance with the future in mind. So what do I mean by that? It's important to look at employee potential. You know, what are their skills? What are their strengths? And very often in performance appraisals and performance reviews, we look at what the individual is not achieving, what they're not accomplishing, what behaviours are not being displayed. And as a consultant, you know, an internal HR manager, it's important to ask, well, what are your strengths? Why are they not being utilised if it is that there are disparities in this situation in the 360 ratings? You know, what is holding them back? Are we supporting them well enough? Or are they just not in a position where their strengths are being realised? And it's all around that kind of positive psychology approach. It's important to think about long-term career opportunities for that individual. Maybe the strengths are better placed elsewhere, better for the organisation, and better for the employee development as a whole by focusing in on strengths and asking those types of questions. Are they in the right role? Are there other ways that we can support them? Also, I think it's important, a 360 platform, that you also gather qualitative information. So in Profile Match 360, which is just this case study, and there's other approaches you can use, of course, there is that quantitative information and that standardization of the process generally, and also as well the scoring is referenced to a particular norm group, so you can get a really clear understanding of where that individual falls and aligns up to the competency. But having those open-ended questions allows for an open conversation around strengths. So raters have the opportunity to give specific examples on strength areas, and again, that's a real wealth of information that you can then use as a practitioner, as a manager, in supporting the supporting the employee going forward. The key as well, I think, with this approach is the world of work today is very different to even what it was, I think, 10 years ago. There's a lot of flexibility from a job, the type of job role an employee does within an organisation. Meaning, there was one example I have of a financial institution. It was an individual I was working with who within that organisation had actually started off as a financial trader, had then worked for X amount of years in risk management, had then gone into a HR type of role, and was now working as a coach within that organisation. So, you know, that was a huge transition across lots of different roles, and very different roles actually, to be honest. But you do see that more, that skills are very much transferable and people are transitioning across different departments within the organisation. And what are the career change opportunities within that company? A 360 approach really gives you an excellent development tool outside of reviewing performance, but looking at, okay, well, what is the future for this individual? How is it that we can support them? I think really relevant in today's society as an organisation as a whole, we need to be quite innovative change direction as a business if things aren't working in one area, and changing course and being flexible, adaptable. Also, 360 assessment really feeds into that whole succession planning. Who's going to be leading in the future? Who's going to be managing in the future? And also as well, identifying high potential individuals that may have gone under the radar otherwise, but because they have that 360, they might not be performing in the eyes of the manager. However, that is not what is being seen by their peer group or their direct reports, and this really sheds light on their potential. To finish up, we recently engaged in research, and we were able to pull data from our 360 assessments completed on our PM 360 platform. And this allowed us to look at a range of interesting points, of which we're still looking at. And one I've pulled through here to share with you is some of the racy gender differences that had been identified depending and looking at different competencies. So this is something which we'll be rolling out over the coming months in a series of blogs and on social media. So do keep an eye out for some really interesting stuff. Within this platform, there's 27 competencies in total, to which, setting up a 360 survey, people will select from that library particular competencies to assess the individual against. And looking across that, and this is data from thousands of 360s that have been completed on the system, and we were able to kind of dissect the data. And so we found there was gender differences in how males and females rate themselves in comparison to each other across a range of different competencies. And I think these are more recent results, and the specifics will be rolled out. But I think really important question to ask as well, why is this type of information important from an appraisal perspective, a performance perspective, and this kind of view individuals, male and females, reviewing their own performance, and where there is, as I said, some biases there. There will always be that biases, but quite interesting to see very specific gender differences. So this is one of the competencies where we did see quite a significant difference. So within this, what we were looking at is, well, first of all, the blue is relating to males and the orange is females. Races rate themselves on the behaviours, and then also you have their peers, direct reports, etc. What we've pulled through here are whether there was agreement with regards to how the individual, the ratee, has rated themselves and their peer group, so whether there was similarities or quite a lot of disparity. So if it is a 0, this means there was agreement with the peer ratings and how the individuals scored themselves. And if it was a positive number, so pulling up more towards the left, so from +1 through to 5, raters, the self-rater, they overrated themselves. And if it was a negative, then they underrated themselves. So you can see quite a significant difference for this competency. It would suggest that males overrated themselves on this competency in comparison to how their peer group have viewed them. Now, it varies between competencies actually, but in the case of analytics, you can see women were significantly more likely to underrate themselves than men. But then you have the flip side when we look at attention to detail. So again, to confirm, the orange is females, blue is males. Here you can see the difference. Women overrated themselves more in comparison to males by looking at the self-rating and the peer ratings. So quite interesting. And just to conclude with that, generally what we found is a larger proportion size of women underrated themselves in comparison to men. It might line up to what you might expect, but I think the key to point here is the real significant difference. So 21 out of the 24 competencies for women in comparison to 4 out of the 24 competency for men, where the women, as I said, score themselves lower in comparison to the ratio group. So really significant difference, and a much larger proportion generally of women underrating themselves. I think this is why the point to make and finish up on, really, I think a 360 approach can really add to this. And specifically, if it is, we are seeing gender biases in how we rate our performance. That this 360 perspective can help to moderate that and give that objectivity. As I said, more information coming through on that in due course. And then we're over to questions. So just to finish up, we have I'm going to have a look and review questions here, but also if it is that you're interested in attending any of our workshops, you can get a 25% discount. Just need to quote this reference. So I just have a couple of questions. I've gone over time more than I had wanted to. So any other questions, we will have that information and we will send direct email correspondence back. So a couple of questions coming through. One question is, if you're looking at using a 360 approach, what's the optimum number and range of raters? I would say it needs to be a minimum of 3 anyway within each rater group, because the process is supposed to be anonymous. So people want to contribute in an open and honest way, except for manager. And I would also be suggesting to get as many rater groups as possible. So that means peers, direct reports and clients. I think they can give you a very different perspective on the individual's behaviour and performance. So just one of the other questions, do the managers need to be given additional coaching to give 360 feedback? I would say yes. I think it is imperative that actually managers are given support and training on how to give effective feedback generally, because I think that is something, unfortunately, that is not done in organisations, and there is a best practice, but specifically around 360 feedback, because it can be very sensitive. So I would say that. So, for example, with this particular client I was supporting, I did half-day training with all of the managers involved around best practice. So yes, I would say to that. Okay, appreciate there's a few more questions coming through, and apologies that we've not had an opportunity to go through them all. We will respond individually to you, however. So thank you for joining me, and we'll be connecting back with you regarding the next instalment of the 360 series. And bye for now.